Yeah, hello everybody. Macroeconomics. Last time we talked in general about the system of economic aims, economic targets, and in general there we had steady and appropriate economic growth, we had price level stability, and we had high level unemployment, and with an historical view on the external balance, that at this part we came from fixed uh, exchange rates, and that in general we can then modify this or expand this system of economic goals to not only a square but fifth, sixth, and seven different aims. So maybe then we can say something like this. Is it 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Okay. So that especially if we look for the German economy, then also in our constitution we find further economic goals, and this would be then the steady, and how did I call it, appropriate economic growth. Growth, price level, stability, high employment, external balance, and then we could expand this with income distribution, sustainable. In general, we can also use the term sustainable climate and sustainable public budget. And within this framework, then we start to talk about how the government will target all these economic goals. Oh, this changed again. I don't know why this always changes. What happens here always? I go on. Okay. Well, I don't know what happened there, but now it almost works. Further on the side. So, okay. Well, and now we want to come to a new topic we already talked about when we had the labor market in general. There we had a type of unemployment called the unemployment together with the business cycle. And now we want to talk in general about the business cycle, because if we start to look on data, and now it again changed. What happened now? Oops. I'm sorry. So hopefully this works now. Yeah, it seems so. That we then can identify a cycle that the economy is, going through different phases, and that these different phases will, always after a specific while iterate, and then we start with a new cycle after a while. And there, then we see that real GDP in general is fluctuating just around some long-term trend. And what this long-term trend is, we will talk in a minute about. And this is the actual development of the economy measured by real GDP. And what we find is that, well, after a time of expansion, that we have there a boom phase where we are relatively above our long-term trend, and that more or less after every boom first we have a phase of decline, that we start to come into a recession, and in the worst part then we are in something like a trough where we are really below our higher than long-term trend, and here we are below term trend, and that then we again start with a phase of expansion, and this happens then again and again. And if we go to the data, then we find that this cycle tends about 7 to 10 years. Well, and now we can think of what qualitatively happens within these different phases. Well, what will happen in a phase of expansion? Well, in general, of course, this has to be a phase where we see an increase of production, and this would mean that we start to highly utilize our production capacities. In this case, increase of production and higher utilization what will happen within our companies? Our companies, well, they want to produce more, and what do they need for producing more? They need more people, and this will then um, go to the case that we start to have falling unemployment. But what will happen then too if we have falling employment? This also means that we have higher income by the people, and higher income, again, we can identify with higher demand in general for consumption goods. Well, and if the companies see higher demand for their output, what can they do then? Then they can start to raise their prices, because then the market power of companies will increase. So in this phase of expansion, we will then, within our general parameters in the economy, we will see an increase of production in general. In parallel, unemployment will fall and prices, inflation will moderately start to increase too. Well, and this process then goes on, but what can then happen? Well, we have a general framework in our economy that we have there a level of full capacity, or we can also say that we can just for a while we can produce also with over utilization, or where we can produce over capacity, and especially we can do this when we are asking our employees for extra hours. So it will be no surprise that within such a phase of when we are in a peak, when we are in a boom, that the company will come to you and ask, well, can you stay longer this evening, for example? Well, of course, also these extra hours have to be paid again. So we have again an increase of income in general. And this increase of income in general will also increase the demand for goods. But now we have the problem that we are here at full or at overcapacity in our economy. So what then happens is that we have an increase for the demand for goods in the phase of expansion. In general, we can also increase production still. So we have not only a price effect, but only an effect of quantity. But now we have this increase of income, increase of demand. But since we are already at full capacity or over capacity, there is nothing more what we can produce. So this additional demand will go mainly into a general increase of prices in our economy. But what will happen if we have a general increase in prices and not in quantity anymore? This will then, in the next step, also increase the costs of the company. So in the end, we will then have a situation where our production is at the limit. So we come into a phase of stagnation because production cannot meet anymore the additional demand. So what we then have is no further increase of production, but still we have high inflations in this situation. Well, and then this means what I already said, that we have a general increase of costs in production for the companies, especially if you take here the increased wages. and labor is one of the main inputs for production. Well, what will then companies will do? Well, they will start to try to cut costs, and this would then mean that we start with a process that production will start to decrease. Cutting costs means also that we lay off the people, and this will increase unemployment. Well, an increase of unemployment then, of course, implies a decrease in income of the people. So demand is falling, and this ends up in declining consumption. So in this phase of recession, we have then the opposite effects than in the phase of expansion. Well, and if things then become really worse, then we are in the trough, and there we have then the situation of low production and very high employment. And hopefully, after this, again, we come into the phase of expansion again. Well, but now we want in more detail talk about this utilization of production capacities and what is this long-term trend, because of course this long-term trend is not only just the average growth of the last years. And for this we define the so-called potential output. And what is this potential output? This potential output, we have to keep in mind, is only a theoretical concept. So if you think of your business administration courses, there maybe you analyzed a company sometimes, and then you can ask what would be the output of this company if this company would produce under normal conditions, if they are if they produce at full capacity. So to speak, we can say that for then in the view for the whole economy, that potential output is the maximum output an economy can produce over the long run, and this means production at full capacity, or in quotation marks, normal, in a normal situation. And of course, then it's possible that we are below this potential output, or in a boom phase that we are higher than this potential output. But again, you have to keep in mind that this is only a theoretical concept. If you think of a whole economy, country, Germany, France, Great Britain, or so on, then of course it is really hard to calculate something like potential output. And the large institutions like central banks, of course also the governments, they try to estimate this potential output, but if you go to different institutions, then of course also you will find different numbers, but they will be somewhere in the same neighborhood. But don't be surprised if you go to the International Monetary Fund or to the World Bank or to the ECB, that there you will find for Germany, for example, then different numbers for potential output. But because this is only an estimation and there is no definite way how to calculated. But let's see if we really see for the German economy in the last years something like this business cycle. And for this, I plotted here the so-called output gap. And there I didn't plot the long-term trend, but that we take the difference between the actual production measured via GDP minus potential output, and this we divide by the potential output, so we obtain a relative number. And if this number equals to 0, then this means we are just at the path of potential output. So positive numbers here mean then that we would be what we called the phase of expansion or the phase of a peak or in the boom phase. Well, and if we look at this here since the reunification of Germany, then maybe we can fit in something like a cycle during this time. Well, and if we take here the two minimas, then we are here maybe around the midst of the 90s. Here we are in the beginning of the 2020s. So this will be roughly 8 years from here, 2003 to 2009. This is maybe 6 to 7 years, and so on. So yeah, roughly we find for Germany the business cycle in the last 30 years. Well, and now I want to do with you some lessons in history, because now I want to go even further, that we try to look at the development now only of the real GDP, and what I plotted here are the growth rate relative to the former quarter. So compared to this, here we have yearly data. And oops, here we have quarterly data. Well, and if we look at this development, then of course we could identify maybe a phase or economic crisis when we have a higher number of negative growth rates or only zero growth rates. Well, and if we look at this, then we find here a phase with negative growth rates. We find one here. Then again here. And of course here. This one, I think you know already what it is. and well, here it starts to be negative. I make here a question mark because the actual forecasts for Germany even say for this year negative growth rates. Well, and if you think about it, well, I open also the chat. I forgot. Hup. So with your help, I hope we can identify what happened in these times. So in the beginning of the 1970s, which historical event we can identify with a general economic crisis? And this was actually a worldwide economic crisis. What happened around 1973? Actually, this since it's right now 50 years, yes, this was the first oil crisis. Well, what happened there? Somehow 10, 15 years before this event, there the OPEC has been founded. And well, then after some time, they started to show the world their power and they reduced the oil production in general. And this was a time where in Germany, where we had car-free Sundays, for example. Okay, then let's go further. And this is in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. What happened there, which had a huge impact on the economy also worldwide? Again, we have to look at the Middle East. Any idea? Well, there happened something, and this what happened then, therefore we still have huge problems in the world. Well, this was the so-called second oil crisis. And why did we have again an oil crisis? The reason was not that the OPEC in general decided to reduce oil production. Well, this was the change from Shah of Persia to hope I write this in the right way, Ayatollah Khomeini, and then the start of Iraq Iran war. And this also, since we had this conflict in the region where the main oil production in the world was, this had also a huge impact on the economy worldwide. Well, then we go further, and in the beginning of the 90s, and this is more or less specific for Germany. Of course, it had also an international impact, but not the world was not in a recession in this time. What was there the historical event which induced a decline of the economy? So if somebody writes us, please give me a hint. Yeah. Well, in this time we had the hope that everything would be fine in our country, but then we saw that not everything was okay. What happened in 99, 1991? Well, this was the reunification of Germany. Well, and why did we have a decline? Well, you see, at first, in the first year of reunification, we had, yeah, a very good economic increase, but then we had for 2-3 years a downturn. And the reason was that we then bitterly had really to realize that the production capacities of the former GDR was really much below the Western standards. So that almost nothing of the industrial production capacities of the former GDR could be really used to be competitive on the world markets. Okay, let's go further in time. In the beginning of the new millennium, what happened there? Inducing a crisis. And this again was a problem which we had worldwide. Yes, great. So this is the dot-com crisis. So with the start of the internet, almost everybody invested in some internet ideas, and this induced then at the stock market a bubble. And then, of course, also coincidentally, we had then the bitter event of the attack of the Twin Towers, and this together then implied this crisis in the beginning of the 2000s. And then the next ones, okay, this I think we directly know in 2008, 2009. This is then the financial crisis, and 6, this is then Corona crisis. Well, and if we compare now the quarterly data with the yearly data, then for 2020 in general, we see here a slight upturn. But if we go to the quarterly data, then you see that in the actual situation, we have now a downturn again. So the general hope that directly after the Corona crisis, that we have this phase of expansion in Germany this doesn't happen right now. So we really have to see how the economy is developing in the further time. And on the next slide, I give you also the other exposition that we now do not plot the growth rates, but as we did it here in our conceptual description of the business cycle, that I give you the absolute value of the index of real GDP. And then I think we see quite good also this business cycle, starting from the reunification, then financial crisis and .com, and here again you see an additional downturn of the economy while from the business cycle we would have expected a phase of expansion. Well, and this is of course, or the reasons for this, then of course the war in the Ukraine, our demographic change in our economy, and the missing of the qualified people in the labor markets. Okay, and then we will come now to the last, so to speak, descriptive topic within this lecture, that before we come to the theoretical parts where we are talking then about macroeconomic models in general. At first, I want to talk with you in general about what is money and what do we understand by money, and why do we have money, and actually also in a developed economy, why do we need money in order for the functioning of our economy. Well, and of course, at first, money is also just a good, and later on we will also then talk about demand and supply of money. But money is a very special good because money has some specific properties in order to fulfill the function we will talk about in a minute. Well, and in general, we use money as a medium of exchange. So we are paying with money some goods, and of course that the guy who is selling us his goods, he will only accept a good as medium of exchange if this good is also scarce. So in general, money has to fulfill the property of scarcity. Well, money is then aber the medium of general exchange. So what we need is that with money we can produce every proportion of exchange of different goods. So maybe we can say you have to pay for this chair here, let's say 15 liters of milk. So then we have the exchange proportion of 15 to 1. Then we can say a jacket costs us 80 apples or something like this. Then we need to show with the medium of exchange with money also the proportion of 1 to 80. So in order to have all these possibilities that we can show all the different proportions, this good has to be highly divisible. And what we also need is, if every people use the same good, then everybody has to judge this good more or less equal. So we need also the property of equality. And what we also want to do, well, we get, if we sell something, an income measured in money. And quite often we do not want to use our money at once, but maybe to consume in the next week, in the next month, or in the next year. And for this, the money has to be the same value or has to be still a value also in future time. And this is then the property of storability. And again, if we use it as a medium of exchange, then it has to be easily transferred between people. And if we take all these properties together, then if we go again to a historical perspective, then we can say all these properties are fulfilled, for example, by gold. Gold has a high scarcity. Gold is a metal with the property that we can easily divide it. And this is maybe the most important property. Well, I don't know why, but in general, it in almost all societies where you are going, everywhere you will find that the people has highly valued gold with a very high value. Storability, this maybe you have learned in chemistry, that you cannot more or less, it is almost impossible to destroy gold. And since you can easily cut in little pieces gold, then you have also this easy property of transferability, and from this also you have then of course the development that we started to produce gold coins in the further time. Okay, so this would be the general properties of money, or a good which we then would call money. And these are of course highly related with the function of money, and of course we already talked about this. And this then means we use it in general as a medium of exchange, or in general it is our payment method. Then of course, related to the storability is we want to store in general value with money, and in a modern economy this is just our unit of account. And let's go to more detail into the different functions. Then we can say that money highly simplifies the process of exchange, because when everybody uses money and everybody values money in the same way, then of course people do not have to meet physically at some marketplace to directly exchange real goods. Take again the case where somebody wants to sell a chair and the other one has the milk. Without money, then they have to meet, and then they can, what did I say? Maybe exchange 15 liters of milk against one chair. So this is then the real exchange. But let's say we have, think about three individuals, A, B, and C, and these individuals producing goods small a, B, and C. And A demands B, B demands C, and what I need, C demands A. Well, without a medium of exchange which all of these guys value in the same way, then of course all three people has to come together, talk to each other, and then maybe they can exchange these goods in a circle. Because nobody of these people has something what they can directly exchange with only one other guy. But with money, so without money, A, B, C have to meet directly, since no one has coincidentally the good the other one wants to have. Well, and if we now think that we have this medium of exchange, that we have money, then we can think of that A and B do not exchange directly goods, but A demands B that B is giving his good to A, and she obtains money for this good. Well, with this money, B can pay C and obtains the good C. And then this cycle is closing, that C with the money is paying A, oops, other way around, and A is delivering his good to individual C. So, if all people in only a real exchange economy would always have to meet, then of course this would increase the transaction costs. But with money, then we have very low transaction costs. And also, since we do not have to physically meet, this also means that we can easily divide our total production process. So this is then more or less the reason that such a medium of exchange, that with money we can really start dividing our total labor process and our production process. So money in the end is then needed that we can invent something like our high diversified production process and our modern economies. Yeah, the store of value, this is something similar. Here we said we physically meet, and then we also can say that in general we want to have difference between our income and expenditure. And this would mean then that with money we can then shift our consumption plans into future. So then we have the possibility, this offers the possibility oops, possibility to split income into consumption and savings. And remember the circular flow, that with this savings also we have the possibility for investment. Especially large investments. Well, we have also to admit that we can store our value, of course, also with other assets, and that money is then in general in competition with these other possibilities. So we could also invest in stocks, in bonds, or let's say also in houses. But of course, there we have one main difference, that money is in general a highly liquid good, that in general we can directly start to buy something with money, while when we have invested, for example, in stocks or bonds, and we want to use these investments to directly buy something, then of course we at first have to sell this, and maybe this is then in a time where the stock market is down. So this is then one main difference, that money is highly liquid. And the last one, unit of account, especially extremely important for a modern economy, is that this is then the general standardization of valuation. And maybe you can think of your own mind that quite often we directly ask ourselves, well, what would this mean for me in euro or in US dollars if I'm doing something? Oops, there is something still. And what I already said is that this offers the main possibility to express all these relative prices of the ratios of real goods, and this definitely highly simplifies all our exchange processes. Well, and when we talked about GDP in general, there I introduced also our national account system, and then with money, with euro, with US dollar, with the currencies, we can then more or less interpret these values in the currency in euros as the weights of the different components of our general economic process. If we take, for example, GDP equals price of private consumption times the quantity of price of private consumption plus price of government consumption times quantity of government consumption, price of investment times quantity of investment, and the last one we had was the external balance, price of exports, quantity of exports minus imports, quantity of imports. So PC private consumption, GC government consumption, I investments, X of course exports, imports, and then all these prices, oops, are valued in money. So in Germany or in Europe in euro, and thus money weights the different components of the economic performance. Okay, these are now the functions of money, and now we want to ask, well, how much money then we will have in our economy, and for this we have to model the demand for money, and this means that we have to identify the motives for holding money, and of course these motives of holding money are also directly related with our functions of money. So then we have these three different types that we started with the properties of money. From the properties of money we came to the functions, and now at the last point we take the transaction mode, we take the motives of holding money, and the first one of course is then more or less also the central one, is the so-called transaction motive, since we need just liquidity to exchange goods when we want to use money for as a medium of exchange. And then of course we have the possibility that we do not have to locally meet at a specific time with other people, and then we can have differences between income and expenditure. Then the so-called precautionary demand is, since in general future is uncertain, we are calculating some risks that something else happens in the future, and this then implies in general also that we will hold some money because of this uncertainty and maybe then unexpected expenditures. And the last one is the so-called speculative motive, and maybe you have already talked in other courses like investment or something like this about this. Well, we can then of course use money in general to invest, and I already talked about the other possibilities to invest is then, for example, the stock market, investing in stocks, or that we can also invest in government bonds. Well, and the government bonds, they are valued via their interest which they are paying, while stocks are just fluctuating. Well, and then we can compare these two possibilities of investment into bonds and into stocks. And there we will have the opposite direction. Well, if interest rates are low, then we have an incentive to shift our investments into stocks. But this will increase the demand for stocks, And what happens then at the stock market? Well, prices will increase because the demand increases. And stock prices will rise. So we have then the dependence that low interest rates will coincide with high stock prices. Well, and if we go back in the last 10 years where we had this time with very low interest rates, then of course also we found that the stock markets highly increased during these times. But what does this now mean for our motive of holding money? Well, so if interest rates are low, stock prices are high, then we think of, in general, that people will hold their money in this situation. Because to invest in very high prices would mean that my dividends would be low. And therefore, we can then say that in general, we have an anti-proportional dependence between holding money and interest rates from this speculative motive. And also, I hope that you have talked about this concept in other courses, is that in general we can say that there is an explanation via the concept of opportunity costs. So we are just comparing the investment of our money or holding money with investing, for example, in bonds. Well, and what does this mean? If you take just your money at home, leaving it at home, what interest would it pay? If you take 1,000 euros, put it in at your table at home, within 1 month, what happens to your 1,000 euros? Yes, it is still the 1,000 euros, so the interest it pays is just 0%. Well, and then you compare this 0% with, for example, a high interest which is paid at the bond market. And therefore, comparing these two, you can deduce then that if the bond market will pay a high rent, high interest rates, then you would take your money at home and investing it. And in the opposite, if interest rates are very low, then the opportunity costs of holding money are very low. So I will hold more money if interest rates are low. And taking all these together, we can then deduce our first money demand function because of the transaction motive and because of the precautionary motive. In general, we can say, well, how many transactions do we plan if we have a high income compared to a low income? And there, in general, we find the richer you are or the richer an economy is, the more transactions we are planning to do. And the same argument holds for the precautionary motive, that we think the richer we are, the more money we hold because of possible unexpected expenditures. And from these two motives, then we obtain twice a positive dependence on income in general. And from the speculative motive or from the opportunity cost argumentation, we obtain a negative demand of money with respect to interest rates. And this is then done here by the plus and the minus sign. Well, and this L, this stands for liquidity. That we derived now qualitatively in general a function for money demand depending on two variables, income and interest rates. And this money demand function we will later on then also use in our general macroeconomic models. Okay, then what this we will do next week is that we will also incorporate prices into our money system, or the relation then between interest rates, prices, and inflation. Okay, that much for today, and we will go on then next week with this topic of money, monetary policy, and interest rates in general. Thank you very much.